most of y'all know me, but for those who don't know me, I do actually have a short introduction. My name is Kiara Young, and I'm the eldest daughter of Jonas Perkins, and he's a sculptor out in Texas, and my sister is right there. So I was born in January. Hold on, I'm having a fight with my board here. I was born January 20th, 1967, and the reason I say that is because the time that I was born impacts my life, because I was born and raised by my grandparents. So I heard stories from the Pullman Porters. Okay, so my grandfather was a Pullman Porter. He rode the Rat Pack on his route from Chicago to New York City. He picked up Eddie Fisher out of the aisle, who was crying because Liz Taylor had dumped him yet again. Wow. A flask sits on my aunt's bar that was gifted to my grandfather from Eddie Fisher. So, in that being said, a lot of the things that have been happening recently to our history and our culture really angered me. And to keep from being pulled off in handcuffs or anything, I decided to paint my way through it, because I have a lot of ponies in this race. One of my children identifies as trans. So, because of that, I have to fight. Period. So, where did I find the strength to fight? I did a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, and begging. And out of that came Josephine Baker. She stood up to me in my dreams and said, "You can do this." And see, I have a story about myself. I spent 20 years as a burlesque dancer because why was I a dancer? Oh, it was easy money and I had kids. So a lot of people maybe looked down upon that, or maybe they thought it was not what I should be doing, or tarnished my entire existence as a Perkins. However, so I just said, okay, fine, that's fine. I'm going to take care of my children the best that I can. And so what it enabled me to do is homeschool. It enabled me to spend very little time outside of the home and actually be a mom. So when Josephine Baker's story came about, whereas she actually, the idea of a person's static mindset is actually a very good camouflage, because of what everyone perceived Josephine Baker to be: silly, willing to dance in blackface, okay? Because I have that in my notes, where she did it at the Shuffle Along, which was 1919, I think it was. She was in a show that was on Broadway. I can give you guys the whole rundown of it, but anyway, it was the first show that had African American cast. However, they did use colorism to determine who could get in. So Josephine Baker, being a little bit darker, she did not get the role right off because she was too dark. So all of this leading up to the artwork that you see here, Josephine Baker as the burlesque dancer with the banana skirt, so forth and so on, and then later Josephine Baker as the French resistant hero. So when I look at my life, I'm not calling myself a hero by any means. The most magical thing I can do, no one even believes in it yet, so that's fine. But the thing is that we sometimes need to revisit the past in order to move forward, especially when there's tar and potholes and road blockages. We have to kind of think about how we can still move forward. So in stories that my grandparents told me were about the Great Depression, I heard about it practically every night. My grandma made hot tamales in order to survive the Depression. My uncle worked for Al Capone in order to survive the Depression. My Uncle Frankie was shot dead in the alley in Chicago, which forced my grandparents to want to move to Harvey in order to escape the violence of Chicago. So my grandparents didn't have money, but my uncle was able to bring Christmas because he worked for Al Capone. Even my aunt tells that story. So now I want to jump a little bit over. I'm not looking at my notes at all, guys. I want to jump a little bit over to the influence of those two paintings. There is an artist, his name is Jacob Lawrence. Some of you who are like art history buffs may actually know that he did 60 gouache and tempera paintings that pretty much depicted the Black migration from the South. So this painting is from, he didn't name them, they're just panel 11 and panel 13. So I did my own twist on them, and if you look up Jacob Lawrence, you will see that his painting is a lot more simple. He only has this figure, the table, and the young boy. There's no eggs. So I changed it to involve other different races in terms of this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the medicine wheel. Anyone familiar with it? So this is an indigenous idea. Okay, now I might have to find the note for this one. God. Okay, so in the theory of the indigenous culture, there are white, black, red, and yellow. Okay, so the white is the north, represents the air. The white-skinned people, stars, midnight, death, winter, intellect, mind, animals, sweetgrass. The black is west, earth, black-skinned people, earth, dust, maturity, autumn, physical body, human, sage. South, water, that's red, red-skinned people, moon, noon, earth, summer, spiritual, soul, plant, cedar. East is depicted by yellow, and that is east, fire, yellow-skinned people, sun, dawn, growth, spring, emotional, mind, mineral, and tobacco. So color as design is spoken by Peggy. Color as emotion, dealing with your own progress, your own transformation, is spoken with Sabrina. And so what I'm speaking about is color as symbol, color as obstacle. Okay, so because color is an obstacle as much as it is a symbol. Okay, so any questions on that one? That's a big one. That's a lot to handle. This talk could be a week long. This talk could be a month-long class, actually. But, you know, are we ever going to do that? We might actually do that, right, one day? So, let's see here. I wanted to still tie in. That piece almost sold, and I'm like, oh no, I need that. So, Giorgio, there's a lot going on with art history. You know, when we are in art school, it's not like when you're studying art by yourself, where you can just kind of bounce around. In art school, they have a particular format, a particular curriculum, and they talked a lot about Klimt. They talked a lot about Picasso. They talked about Georgia O'Keeffe. They talked about Norman Rockwell. And I was always wondering, like, what are the black people doing at this time? Like, you know, like, it's like, what are they doing? And so I understand that Georgia O'Keeffe had her story, and that, you know, she had a, you know, overexposure by her husband or boyfriend at the time, and that, you know, her flowers symbolize femininity to the onlooker, but to her it had something totally different. And I wonder, did Georgia O'Keeffe ever really tell us? She argued that her pieces did not represent female genitalia, but she tried to get in with more detail so that you would see the flower. She wanted us to look deep into nature. And I use it as a parallel to time, like what was happening at that time that my culture was going through and transforming in the way that they did with the Harlem Renaissance, what she was doing at her time period. So actually, man, it's like there's so much to talk about in terms of the timeline, and I try my best to like make it nice and neat, but it's impossible. I do have it where you can actually read it. So this to me should be a book. So let's see. Do you have any questions? It was a lot, right? Do you have any, if just somebody asked me a question, please.
Was the piece you're referring to this one here in the white frame?
Yes, Black Iris.
Okay.
Yes, that is Georgia O'Keeffe's Black Iris, and this one is Georgia O'Keeffe's. And so I put my own twist on it. Mine is more purple, okay? Because I do have a list here about what the colors represent to me. So indigo is kind of the colors I'm using there, and there are a few blues, but indigo, so if you were to buy like a pair of these glasses, okay, for color therapy, color healing, your indigo, if you were drawn to that, feelings of serenity, stillness, internal peace, and heightened creativity, which is very interesting because that is exactly what Sabrina chose for her paintings. So there is a theory in healing that we plant the flowers in our gardens at home that give us the frequency of healing that's needed. So if we're artists and we're painting, we may be using that same color therapy intuitively. So it's not having anything to do with, oh, I had to go to school and learn with this, or let me pull up my chart and see, oh, I'm feeling this way. No. Okay, so when they're trying to sell you a product, yeah, they're going to explain it to you. You know, just like with this is kind of crossing techniques here, but with manual lymphatic drainage, they weren't really talking about it that much dealing with people who had cancer. They weren't telling people like, oh, you need to go get manual lymphatic drainage. Who brought it out was the plastic surgeons, because they wanted to sell people on the fact that if they worked on you and you went and got your manual lymphatic drainage, you could be completely beautiful. So when you want to learn something and feel like you cross-reference your studies, and I did a lot of research in terms of what I felt and then trying to understand what kind of marks I made and what kind of colors I chose, or what kind of paintings I chose. And I would like to talk about this panel a lot. So I put this drawing here. If you look closely, that one has barbed wire. So at that time that I did this painting, there was a lot of news about people being taken out of the country, farm workers and things. Now, when Jacob Lawrence did this painting, he doesn't have a bird. He does have the rays coming down. There's no figure, there's no baby, none of that. But in mine, the similarity is the crops. So as people migrated from the South due to injustices that were happening at the time, a lot of black people, African Americans, we left the South for a better hope in St. Louis. They wanted New York. They wanted Chicago. And the crops died. So there's a very strong, like, deja vu feeling I'm getting here. If you look at 1941, you had African American people leaving, and actually the police were involved in trying to get the people to stay. They played around with their ticket, they threatened them, there were all kinds of things happening to try to keep the African American people from moving. And so this painting came about. And so there you have this woman with this baby and a rattle, and we don't even know what direction she's going. The fence is there. I thought about making the fence go all the way across, but then I decided to leave it open. And something very strange happened when I was doing that painting. I found this song on the iTunes, and it's called Remembering the Taino. And I played it, it was very nice. I had incense and sage going, things in the room. And then the very next day I found out that it was actually the grand entry day of all the tribes in the powwow up in New York. So it was just crazy how I had this kind of out-of-body experience at the same time. So, hope that answers that question. I don't know how I got from that to that, but there's just so much for each of these things. I just basically wanted people to understand that sometimes color has all of these different things, and when you are an artist and you are basically, I mean, I feel like we're all hogtied at this time, in this period in our lives. We're hogtied because we don't want to mess things up for the way we have it. And so it's hard to speak out about what's going on and just kind of feel like, well, if I just stay out the way, everything will be fine. Let me just find a way. So I felt like symbolism was really good, and saying things in French was a very safe way to resist. Because if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. So it's kind of like I am preaching to the choir by gatekeeping the information, because unless a person has the, wherefore to say, I'm gonna look that up, that sounds really interesting, they won't even know what's really happening here on the wall. So I want to talk a little bit about Nina Simone, because I've really, I have some pieces down there, two Nina Simone's and one Langston Hughes. She had a bipolar condition that was undiagnosed, and she was really involved in the civil rights movement as well with her songs. And when the civil rights was over, or so we thought, she felt she had a hard time feeling like there was a purpose for her, but she was also dealing with mental health issues. So I feel like when you're not having those sort of problems, you know how to transition, whereas she had a hard time transitioning, but her voice now is very much, all those songs can come back, her entire life story. We can still think about how we can be inspired by that, or see what happened. And we just know we gotta hold on. The whole idea is like trying to find a productive way to protest, to resist, to help, to educate. And for me, that's what I chose. I chose to educate, to tell my story, to keep their legacies alive, because they're trying to erase it. I'm not going to just stand around and let that happen.
Well, that kind of wraps up the artist presentation. applications for tonight, but if anybody has any questions or wants to discuss the art further, or just walk around and take a look up and down these walls here, because these walls are filled with art and most of it is Kiara's art. And many of her pieces are inspired by other artists, but she always puts her own very interesting spin on it. But Sabrina and Kiara are still here to talk to you about their art and any other questions you might have, and just feel free to mingle and relax and do that. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and we'll have more of these in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.